Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Self-Defense and Prepping Worldwide. My name is Kevin Hammond. In today's episode we'll be discussing the fourth finger of the 5 basic needs, which is society, and I'll be giving you 5 keys to society so that you can plan how to prep within a social situation and come up with the best prepping plan for you and your family. I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you guys to like and subscribe to my channel so that as many people can see this stuff as possible and we can all be prepared for what's coming. So let's get to it. The 5 keys to society. What do we mean when we say society in terms of prepping? Well, basically you don't live in a vacuum. As much as we would like to think that we can just disappear out there, we do live in a society and we have to take this into account when we're coming up with a prepping plan. Prepping is often a solo activity in terms of watching videos like this and then building up your supplies and coming up with your plan. But the truth is, in a real shit hits the fan situation, you need to decide whether you're a lone wolf or part of a wolf pack, which is key number 1. What do I mean by this? Well, basically if you look at wolves, most of them live in packs and there is strength in the pack. Like they say in the Rangers, which uses this, the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. But at the same time, you also have lone wolves that sort of break away from the pack, and they manage to live their lives out on their own in the wild. And sometimes they develop characteristics that other wolves find to be very attractive. So, in terms of prepping, you need to decide whether you're on your own or whether you have a team and you guys are going to prepare together. What it also means is that if you have young children or parents who you need to look after, you need to factor this into your prepping plan, because we are human beings, we're not reptiles, we look after our young, and the notion that you shit hits the fan situation, it's every man for himself, well, I would rather die defending my family than live on my own in the bush knowing that I left them to their fate. So you need to accept this and accept that unless you're somebody who doesn't have many attachments, maybe you live in a city or even a country separate from any family and friends, generally speaking you're going to have a wolf pack that you're going to need to look after, but they can also look after you and watch your back. But there's not to say that you can't ever be a lone wolf. The most highly decorated soldier in the Rhodesian army was Captain Schulenburg, and he was famous for being the prime proponent of solo reconnaissance. Nobody ever had even heard or thought of solo reconnaissance. He would scope out and do reconnaissance of enemy bases on his own with no support. And the way he saw it was that on his own he was actually at his safest, because he only had to know where he was and where the enemy was. He didn't have to worry about his comrade giving their position away or becoming compromised. And also, when you're on your own, you're like a hunted animal. You're going to move very quietly and stealthily. You're not going to make noise, and in this way you're actually safer than being with someone else and you guys have to sort of communicate and potentially give your position away. Also, obviously, if you live in a country on your own, away from your family, it affects your prepping plans, and then you need to decide how you're going to look after yourself and where the best place to look after yourself is. In terms of having a friends and family in your prepping plan, you need to consider that only friends and family within your local area really matter in terms of a shit hits the fan situation. As bad as it may sound, what I mean by that is like someone like my brother who stays in America whilst I'm staying in South Africa. He helps me out a lot in terms of emotional and potentially financial support, and maybe even getting support from American backers or whatever. But in terms of a truly shit hits the fan situation, there's the Atlantic Ocean between us. One thing we've seen in this COVID-19 pandemic, and it's a constant theme in many shit hits the fan situations, is the roadblock. Roadblocks are a common theme whenever there's civil unrest, and it may be police roadblocks, it could be paramilitary roadblocks, it could just be a bunch of burning tires and rocks from protesters, which is something that we in South Africa are well aware of. So in terms of your wolf pack, it has to be people in your town and surroundings. Most of my friends live in other towns, they're not that far away, they're only about 45 minutes drive, but I haven't seen them since January because I don't have a license for essential travel, and I can't travel between towns without being stopped by the police or the army. So the roadblock is something that really cuts down on your ability to travel to a large extent. You have to factor this into your plans and know that it's better to have 2 or 3 friends within your local surroundings who can actually come to your aid and you can go to their aid in a bad situation than having 20 people all over the country but you can't get together because of roadblocks. So you need to factor in whether you're a lone wolf, whether you have a wolf pack, how your wolf pack is structured, and whether they'll actually be able to come to your aid and whether you'll be able to aid them when the shit hits the fan or when the roads are blocked. Which brings us on to key number 2, bugging out or bunkering in. These are the 2 main schools of thought in terms of all prepping channels and in terms of all preppers. It's either a case of you defending your home and what you have, your prepping supplies, in a sort of homestead fortress kind of role, or you're realizing that, you know what, it's too dangerous for me where I am, I need to evacuate, in which case you're bugging out. I stay on a farm here with my parents. It's not my farm, it's their farm, although we stay in separate houses, which makes it me very fortunate, and I'm more of a bunkering in kind of guy. So I have the land with which to do some agriculture, I can grow my own food, and also I'm a little bit removed from neighbours, although they actually are a lot closer than you would think, and that means I'm much more inclined to be bunkering in. So my security plans and that are generally about defending the farm against attacks or something like that, and as opposed to being a bug out kind of guy. Now, I don't really believe in bugging out, because when you're bugging out, essentially you're giving up your home and you're becoming a homeless refugee. To me, that's not really prepping, but for many people, they don't have a choice. They don't have a farm or a really secure dwelling. Maybe you're staying in an apartment in a congested city, in which case bugging out would make a lot of sense because you're really vulnerable where you stay. So that means there are some advantages to bugging out if you don't have any alternatives and if where you stay is quite vulnerable. In terms of bugging out and going into the bush, that's largely an American phenomenon because they just have so much wild country out there. When I went to visit my brother, I was astounded at just the size of the woods and the amount of wild country where you could literally just disappear. So if you live in a country, or sort of say a state like Alaska or the Pacific Northwest, somewhere that's surrounded by these massive tropical rainfall, not tropical, massive rainforests, where there's no one guarding them and there's no park rangers, then perhaps bugging out makes sense, because the main advantage to bugging out is that people don't know where you are. Whereas if you're bunkering in, you're in a set, known location, and people know where you are, and they can obviously come and attack you. Whereas when you're bugging out, nobody knows, you're in the woods, supposedly, where no one can find you. But in South Africa or other countries, this really isn't possible because there just isn't wild country out there. There is nowhere for us to bug out to where there's no one around. Like I say, I stay on a farm, it's pretty isolated, but there must be 30 or 40, no, maybe even more, 50 people who walk past and drive past our property every day and walk on the path on the side of my house. So the notion that I could disappear is kind of ludicrous, and in South Africa there's always somebody around. Even if you bug out into the middle of a national park, there's going to be park rangers and anti-poaching patrols and that. You're not going to be able to hide where no one can find you. So unless you stay in America or Siberia, somewhere close to a massive forest or bush, bugging out basically just means you're running away and becoming a refugee. So bear that in mind, but still come up with your plan. What works best for you? Maybe bugging out from your place in the city to your friends in the country counts as bugging out because you're bugging out from your residence. But come up with a plan, know the pros and cons of bunkering in and bugging out, and factor those into your prepping plan, your overall society prepping plan, because in a shit hits the fan situation, you have to worry about the other people out there more than anything else. Which brings us on to key number 3. Key number 3 is communications. In terms of prepping and communications, you have to realize that, for instance, you're watching this video on the internet. We take the internet for granted. But what is the internet and what are these cell phones that we use for all our information and all our communications. Basically, a cell phone is just a little walkie-talkie that has a transmitter and a receiver in it. And this transmitter and receiver, they don't go transmit a signal all the way to the other side. They just transmit a signal to the nearest cell phone tower, which then picks up this signal, or whatever it is, a voice note or a text message, and then this massive cell phone tower, transmits it the long distance to the other side, whoever's on the other side. Now, we take this for granted. We've got 3G, 4G, now even 5G, but these radio communications, internet communications, internet-based communications are incredibly vulnerable. What we've seen in countries like China and Iran when there's protests is the government can quickly and easily shut down the internet. We're completely reliant on these cell phone towers, and you can just switch those cell phone towers off, in which case there's no more communications. You can't get your news, you don't know what's going on, and you can't communicate with the people who are important to you. It could be a case of they can't even call you for help. My grandmother stays down the road about 5 kilometers away, and we've had times when the internet signal and the data signal has been so bad just because of the general bad signal that she hasn't been able to contact us, and she's in her 80s. So now if she has a situation and she needs to call for help and the cell phones are down because of whatever reason, basically she might as well whistle because no one will be able to help her. So you need to bear in mind exactly how vulnerable all these internet-based communications are. I know WhatsApp says they're encrypted and you've got your Googles and everything. We'll talk about privacy in the later key, but the truth is, not only are these communications vulnerable to being shut down, any radio communication, whether it's on a cell phone or a two-way radio or even some advanced digital radio, can be literally intercepted. As soon as you transmit, it goes out into the air. Someone can grab your signal or your message, and they can intercept that message and either read it or jam it or something like that. So you have to understand how vulnerable radio communications really are. They are the most effective but also most vulnerable form of communication we have. Any radio signal can not only be intercepted, it can also be jammed. So your government could, or a powerful entity, could jam the radio and cell phone signals in your area, in which case you can't communicate with anybody. So how do you get around this? Well, it's actually very difficult because everyone is on their cell phones, and we take it for granted that we'll always be able to WhatsApp and phone our friends in need. The way you get around it is to obviously have your own radio transmitters that are not relying on cell phone towers. But this is difficult because your average walkie-talkie with a little aerial only has like a 2 to 4 kilometer range. So the people you're talking to have to be really close by if you're going to have two-way radios that work. There are ways to obviously build up your radio infrastructure, have your own antenna, and maybe do some ham radio and that, in which case you can communicate independently of cell phone towers over a long range. But this requires an enormous amount of investment. The one point I would tell you about walkie-talkies is that you need to get one that is constantly on charge, that you can keep it in its charger. I got some walkie-talkies to speak to my parents in the other house across the driveway, and they used 3 batteries a night. Eventually we stopped using them just because they were so heavy on batteries. So bear that in mind, and always have walkie-talkies or two-way radios that can charge constantly, because they use a lot more battery power even when you think there's nothing going on. Apart from building your own radio infrastructure, there are other sort of archaic ways of communicating, even things like pigeons and carrier pigeons or weird things like that. And it may sound stupid, but you need to think about, what am I going to do when the cell phone towers switch off? Because you're fucked. Basically, if you don't have an alternative and the towers go down and your cell phone and internet infrastructure goes down, how are you going to be able to know what's going on? So obviously the most obvious thing then is to have passive receivers, things that don't rely on you transmitting, but you just need to receive signal from somewhere else. What do I mean by this? I mean things like old wireless radios and even television. If the internet goes down, you could still be able to pick up things like BBC World Service or international radio programs, perhaps even things like CNN and international news programs on your TV, and you can at least know what's going on. if the cell phone towers go down in a war situation, your government's against you, the BBC might be able to tell you, hey, your capital city's about to fall, don't give up yet, the sort of rebellion is going to win. Whereas you may have no idea because they've instantly shut down your internet communications. So you need to consider passive receivers, and you need to try and build up your own radio infrastructure and have alternative communications forms that don't rely on the internet, because that's the first thing that goes in a truly shit hits the fan situation. Which brings us to key number 4, which is intelligence, and more specifically local intelligence. Because you're prepping for when shit hits the fan and you decided now probably to bunker in, or even if you're bugging out, you should at least know where you're going to bug out to. You should know what's going on around you. This doesn't only apply to doomsday prepping, but for everyday prepping as well. So you need to know, for instance, who your local authorities are and where they are. So if you're in America and you have a representative, you need to know who your congressional representative is for your area, for your district, so that you can write to this person and complain to them or ask them, to represent you, which is their job. So you need to know your local politicians. Who is your mayor? Who is the sheriff or the sort of chief law enforcement officer in your town, the captain of the police? You need to know where the police stations are and where the magistrates' courts are, and potentially even where the jails are. And we had a worker who was arrested many years ago for something he didn't do. He was taken to the Krugersdorp jail, and he was held there for a few days until the case was cleared. So we went to the Krugersdorp jail and we gave him some food and we tried to help him out. And it was kind of fascinating just to see the sort of inside of the jail and where and how the people are held. So now I know in my area, if I'm falsely accused of something, or if I'm arrested for something, where will I be taken? I'll probably be taken to the Krugersdorp jail. I know where it is, and it's less of a surprise to me as opposed to if you didn't know anything. In terms of this, obviously you need to factor in, you can be arrested or apprehended, maybe falsely identified or something. So you need to have, as part of your local intelligence, you need to have, I won't say have a lawyer on retainer because that can be very expensive, but you need to have a plan for getting hold of a lawyer, getting in touch with the lawyer, and getting a lawyer to defend you when you really need it. I've known a guy who was accused, he did actually do it in this case, but the lawyer got him off. So a really good lawyer, knowing who a good lawyer is, having, speak to your friends, maybe they've had issues with the law, and say, who was that lawyer? I want to get his number, so that if I have issues with the law, he can get me off, he can make a plan, same as he did for you. In terms of local intelligence as well, you need to know back routes to your farm, to your place of residence, and how to get to the shops. Because like I've spoken of, there are roadblocks. So you need to know, okay, if that road is blocked, there's this alley and there's this dirt road. You need to have an idea of your local geography, where things are, alternative routes to get to and from places, so that you can master your situation in your local area. Even if you're bugging out, you need to have a plan where you're bugging out to, who is in that area, and what are they likely to find me, and what am I likely to face. So you need to have a comprehensive understanding of who is who in your local area in terms of the law enforcement authorities, magistrates, policemen, municipal officials, those kinds of things, because this empowers you to not only be an active citizen, but it also lets you know potentially who it is you may face and who it is that may protect you or that you may need to protect yourself from, depending on the situation. So when we talk about local intelligence, have things like maps of your local area, know where the crime hotspots are, dangerous areas to go, perhaps areas that you could hide things or cache things, know the back routes and the little alleyways, become the master of your area, so that gives you an advantage over anyone who's not from that area. We've seen this again and again in conflicts where local fighters have an advantage over people who come from another area or from another country because they don't know the local terrain, they don't know the ins and outs of the local situation, and they're at a massive disadvantage. Even though they may have technological superiority over the locals have the local knowledge, and you need to have the local intelligence of your area and of your district. Know who's who, and get to know them, or even just write down their names and contact details within a little book, so that when the time comes, you may be able to phone an important person or somebody who is a known protector of your rights, and that could be the difference between sitting in jail or being at home. So that's key number 4, which brings us on to our 5th and final key, which is truth versus fake news. This is obviously the hardest part in this day and age, is that we are so bombarded with information. We are told so many things from so many sources, and generally speaking, in any given day you'll read 2 contradictory news stories. One will say the virus is bad, the other one will say the virus is not so bad. One will say this president is bad, the other one will say the president is good. So it's really hard to know what's real and what's not. And in terms of prepping, you need to be informed, but at the same time you need to be aware of the amount of fake news that's out there and conspiracy theories. I'm not saying all conspiracy theories are wrong, but people within the prepping community may have a propensity to go down a certain road in terms of, once they hear conspiracy theories from people who have the same political leanings as them, you're more likely to believe that. But it doesn't mean that it's true. So you need to have an open mind, and you need to be rational and read different sources and come up with your own opinion. Don't just accept what the mainstream media says, and don't just accept what the alternative media says. Read and hear both, watch both, and come up with your own idea of what's going on out there. Don't be ignorant, but at the same time, don't be triggered by every little thing you read on Twitter or every news article, some of which they've blown the whole story out of proportion. So in addition to your local knowledge, you need to be abreast about stay abreast with what's happening in your local area, because in a shit hits the fan situation, history has shown us that society is more likely to become almost feudal as central authority breaks down. What we mean by this is that, if you live in a province and there's one guy in that province who's helping out everybody, and he's the sort of main man and the quote-unquote lord in that area, he may be a much more useful person to you than the national leader who's completely removed from the situation and may have no idea or inclination to help you. So you need to understand that when central authority breaks down, local authorities take over. This happened at the end of the Roman Empire. As the power of the Caesars declined, the power of the local dukes, that's where the term duke means general in Latin, they became more and more powerful. The local magnates began to have their own armies, their own systems of justice, and they became the central governing authorities, even on a impromptu level. The emperor was still in Rome, but it didn't matter. He was just a figurehead. What mattered was that the baron or the magnate, the duke in your area, was protecting you from barbarians, and he was doing his thing, and therefore he was your leader. So you need to be aware that your local leaders are likely to become more important or more dangerous, depending on where you stand, in a shit hits the fan situation. And in terms of knowledge and fake news, you need to understand who your local leaders are. You need to understand what's really going on there. Try and decipher all the fake news and understand what's important to you and your family. Don't get carried away. It does not just say don't volunteer or don't ever become involved in a bigger fight, but understand that as a prepper, you can't be triggered. You have to play the long game. You have to be strategic instead of tactical, and you need to filter through the bullshit and come up with a plan of your own. So that's basically what this whole society thing has been about. It's coming up with a plan for yourself within the society you live. If you live in the UK and it's a different society to the one we have here in South Africa, which is different to America, different states in America are different, but you need to come up with a plan that works for you within the society you live and the area where you live, so that you can communicate with your friends and family, you can protect your friends and family, and you can protect your rights and standing in society from the threats out there. Thanks for watching, guys. Please be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye for now.